So I'm joined here with Kevin Tang. He is the student director of Humber Esports. He is our boss. So Kevin, thank you for joining along and doing this.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
So I think maybe we can just start at the very beginning with you. What program are you taking at Humber College?
So currently I am at sport management and third year.
Okay, and so when you signed up for the sports management course at Humber, was it fully to get involved with esports?
Yeah, so I am at my second program actually at the college. I was at a previous program that was also at the college, it being game programming, and then I had made the switch over to the sport management program due to the fact that the work I was doing for Humber Esports was something I was super interested in and wanted to pursue further. And so I purposely sought out a program that would help me to do my work at Humber Esports better.
I see. So a lot of the work that you look after and take care of are the type of things that you've adapted from your program.
Mhm. So the program itself is a bit technically it is a business program. It is under the School of or the Faculty of Business at the college. It is very much so on the back end management side in the world of sport industry. A lot of how to operate a team, how to operate an organization, which is exactly the kind of work I am doing with Humber Esports.
I think that's probably one of the best things you just touched on because at least with esports, as new as an industry it is, right? It's not like you go and you get the esports diploma at the esports school for the esports job, right? It's a lot of different um, departments coming together, right?
Correct. Where my program is based in sport traditionally, I am purposely converting a lot of the materials, converting a lot of the assignments, really, information that I'm getting into the or through the lens of esports to give it a context within the world of esports. Because at the end of the day, a lot of the standard information from the sports industry can be converted one to one into esports. And for as you said, there is just that lack of esports education out there, especially here in Canada and Toronto specifically. Within the city of Toronto itself, there's only one school with one program that offers esports as a specific field or industry for the program. And so, as a kind of second best, is working within sports, which is very much so influenced onto esports. As in, esports has copied a lot of what it's done and its work into, sorry, from sports. And so, with this program here, I am able to make that conversion as well within the collegiate level.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, especially because there's just overlap because it's competition, right? At the end of the day, it's just a competition, just in a different form.
Mhm.
So when we talk about the business side of things, that usually entails a lot of paperwork. So would you be able to tell me about what that paperwork covers?
Yeah, so the gist of paperwork is on two factors of one, archiving, and then two is authentication in a sense, and then three, it's analysis. So with archiving, the idea is what we talk about is often sustainability in a sense that how we interpret one of the core values of Humber College, which is sustainability, as the value, we treat that as sustainability in a sense of being able to operate long term. So our second backing onto that is that the idea that Humber College, or really all colleges, different to universities you might think about in the States, where the programs here are often shorter. Same thing in the university as well, that they are short in the sense of how often someone would work in a space. Where you might think about working a job somewhere, being part of a team, any kind of sports team organization, you would probably think a decade or more. Whereas, especially in the view of college, you have defined short time frames. One of the shortest set of programs we offer is semester, which is 4 months. That means we as Humber Esports may only have an individual for just 4 months. We have to make the most out of it. Archiving comes in where we're able to try and capture as much of the information and knowledge that a person is able to offer us and the school, the community as well, and try and keep a record of it so that even after they left, after the short time frame that we know we only had them for, we're not totally losing them entirely. They could be, the next great genius that could make huge strides within the esports industry. We want to make sure that we can still have a bit of that effect within our space as well by being able to keep track of their thoughts, their ideas that they could have offered and given us, that we can then take that and pass on to whoever comes next, because there is always going to be that next, as that's how the college is. It's a constant revolving door. People come and go, and we just have to find a way to tackle that, to counter that. With authenticating, it really is coming down to proving more, not just to ourselves, but to the administration we're working with. We do admittedly work in an environment at Humber College where we're not entirely accepted, as is the case for esports in much of society. It just isn't that big of a deal yet, so to say. There are lots of parties for all sorts of different reasons that don't entirely support esports, or even supports video games for that matter. Common thing is that kind of the idea of how rock music was in the past, the punk music. It's this thing that old generation thinks will corrupt their children, right? That stigma still exists. It's not like it's entirely gone, as much as we've dealt with it over the years, in recent years. So authenticating there is a factor that where we, through paperwork, capture as much of the records of activities, the work our teams are doing, these and our staff are doing, right? To show that these people are doing legitimate activities, right? And they can be proud about something they can talk about and share, to show the others that, hey, this is authentic work with real clear values that they are doing. And we are here describing it to you. You can read about it, right? You get this physical context, so to say, this
Mhm.
tangible papers. If you want us to print out documents, we want us to email you a long list of reports of here's everything they've been doing. So you can clearly see, like, oh, wow, they're not just playing video games on their own, right? They're working as a team. They're communicating. They've got these clear schedules they operate by. There's this prize they're fighting for at the end of the day. Like there's all this kind of background work that happens beyond just seeing them play for 5 minutes on a stage, so to say, right?
Mhm.
So that's the authenticating value that lets us speak to administration, speak to other parties about, how to, I want to say, counter their stigma they have towards us, to show that what we're doing is of value, that it's worth, even if you don't totally support us, to at least let us do what we're doing, continue with it. And then the third is analyzing, where the paperwork, as I said, we keep track of records of activities. It also has a component, especially for players, of tracking their own personal health, their wellness, their own not just for health and wellness outside a game, but also in game, their performance. So that lets us and our staff be able to more clearly identify the thought process, the internal dilemmas and whatnot of players, at least to a basic degree that we can work off of, and to pinpoint time frames of issues, or also what those issues are themselves. So analyzing with context, right, with the larger set of reports that, oh, we know for this month they've been working on these specific components, these certain activities, and we say like, oh, we've analyzed that their mental has gone down within this time. Maybe that lets us know that this player just doesn't like doing this kind of activity, right? That lets us analyze that, oh, this doesn't work for this team. We need to find
Mhm.
something different for them to do. Or maybe their mental has shot up. They've really improved their morale. Like, oh wow, they actually do like this activity. Let's try and incorporate more of this into what they're doing. Right? So that lets us analyze to a further level for the players as well as staff, and then for us as well, for how do we support them in a way that best benefits them.
And that is amazing because I was about to start asking you like, why would paperwork be mandatory? Not just within Humber, but for every organization. So you just hit every nail on the head there. So what's actually really interesting is at one point you touched upon, not every college is always fully on board with the idea of esports. Now, would you say that part of that reason is just fiscally? It's like we're going to put money into your department, but what sort of return are we going to get fiscally? Would you say that that plays a bit of a role into it?
Correct. One of the big things that's always supported at a wide variety of colleges and universities, even though it might not seem fitting to the idea of academics. Because at the end of the day, that's what college and university are for, right? It's to
Mhm.
provide learning, is provide academics. That is done through programs people pay tuition to come here for. But then you have this other component that's really massive, almost always in every other school, or sorry, in every school, is this athletics as attached on board.
Mhm.
Technically, it's not direct academics, right? It's not these kind of focused research pieces. There are various all sorts of physical health programs that exist, but they're not under athletics per se. They're attached, they're connected to it, but they're not through it. Yet athletics exists for years upon years, receives plenty of funding, so that kind of money exists for it. But it's the idea that athletics is a major activity that drives recruitment. And that's what and universities really care about, making sure you're getting enough people through doors. They said revolving doors, right? That year over year, you're making sure you're getting enough students coming through. Esports, as it stands, is not as big as athletics. It's not as big as traditional sports. Mentioned a bit
Right.
earlier that while we are trying to, mirror traditional sports a lot, in society, esports just isn't as big as compared to traditional sports. So
Mhm.
to that extent, as a community wise, it's just not as big of a deal for colleges to drive as a tool for driving recruitment. They have plenty of other methods that they've honed through decades of existing, through centuries of operating as schools, right, for how to make sure we get enough students to come to the door. Esports is a new thing on the stage that's increasing in terms of popularity, right? So it's more and more being as seen as a beneficial thing for schools to make sure they get students into their doors. But as it stands, that kind of limitation for how much they're willing to support it is really just based on their own idea of community of how popular is esports in their school, in the reach of their school, right? So how many people would they make sure they can get into their doors because they're doing esports? In some regions of the world, especially for example, LA, where just lots and lots of esports happens in the city. Right? Lots
Mhm.
and lots of esports competitions and businesses operate out there. So a lot of the schools in LA will also do esports because they know there's an existing market that they want to capture, or that is captured already by default because of all those tournaments and businesses operating there. And so they just want to slice of that pie. It already exists for them without them doing any of the work and just say, hey, we're going to do esports too. We don't have to really develop too much because there's enough esports development out there already. We don't have to develop an esports community. We're just going to take a little bit of it. We're just going to open our doors and say, you can do some esports stuff here. And so it's worth for them to invest in esports right now,
Mhm.
right? So that's really the big kind of limitation that schools often look at.
So when we talk about uh, certain markets having, actually, I'm just going to rewind a little bit, and I'm not going to talk about markets. Um, so when we talk about starting up a collegiate esports organization, would you be able to tell me about what we refer to as year zero? Like,
Mm.
the very, very early days of Humber Esports?
So for us at Humber Esports, our year zero was eminently could be a lot stronger than what was a true year zero because of the fact for us we had existing gaming communities. Though I will say most college and universities will have some sort of a gaming community already existing. It's how well you tap into
Mm-hmm.
that for your year zero. So for us in particular, we pretty much absorbed the existing League of Legends and Super Smash Brothers, I believe was 4 at the time, the one on the Wii U,
Mm-hmm.
their communities into our Humber Esports banner. And so by default, we already had a bit of an existing structure. These groups, these clubs had their own presidents and VPs for various different levels. They had their own activities going on for years and years. And so that gave us a bit of leadership we could already borrow onto for how to operate within a gaming community. These groups as well already had their own players that were competing at a fairly high level in amateurs, for example, where they would form their own teams within their clubs and go compete in leagues and tournaments of their own accord, right? So we could speak to them and say, what are things we can compete in? What do those tournaments look like for you guys? How do they feel, right? So how do we need to prepare for it? So our user was heavily based around communicating with the existing community, how to bring them on board its best way where we can that would benefit both of us. Some of them did want a certain level of autonomy in their activities, which we were totally on board with. And then how would they be able to help do our esports side if they want to remain a bit more casual? And then really doing research off of all the knowledge and information that they provided, as well as that we could find within the wider community. The community itself, esports in general, especially at collegiate level, is pretty broad and open to just communicating with one another, to provide information to one another. A lot of people are out there that's willing to provide help. And our year zero was about building as many connections as we could within the existing community, as we were a bit of a latecomer onto the scene, and to take their knowledge and to adjust it to fit a framework of what Humber Esports should look like. And then off of that, building, taking that connections and taking that knowledge, we then set up ideas for infrastructure. So again, year zero was taking the existing community that we had, so this for Humber context specifically, though if without that existing structure, existing community, it would probably be building the community itself, which obviously we did do for the Humber Esports as a brand or as an identity more so than a brand, and then building relationships with the further existing community outside of Humber College. I should have made that more specific to the wider collegiate esports and esports industry, and then using all of that to build infrastructure, setting out some basic plans of how we would look like within years to come, and setting up a structure that will last. So when it comes to infrastructure and structure, there's two parts of tangible and intangible for us in year zero. The tangible for us in year zero was around one specific facility, which we call the dojo, which is a training room, just six PC setups within a very small enclosed room. That was the physical infrastructure that allowed us to support our team's activities. That we could take really was the Smash and the League of Legends teams and provide them a physical space in campus dedicated to the activities they were doing, competing in esports. And then also using that space to hold minor events to show off that there are esports activities going on within the college. Again, leading back to building up our identity, building up the community. And then the other part of ensure being tangible was what we talk about paperwork. How do we figure out the best ways to make sure that within the first year we can set up a process or as many tools as we could to ensure that even after we're gone within whatever number of years, which is probably a short time frame based on when students graduate, that this stuff could still continue to go on, that there is meeting that value of sustainability, right? So year zero was also figure out how do we make paperwork? What could the paperwork
Hmm.
look like? What do we ask from these paperwork? What do we want out of this paperwork? So all of that was being set up just in year zero.
So by the time that I came on board, there were a lot of teams. Like there was Call of Duty, there was Rainbow Six, we had the two Smash teams, there was Shadowverse, a whole lot of people. So would you be able to tell me about that expansion from League of Legends and Smash Brothers to what we had in that year?
Mhm. So it's a bit of a case of them coming out the woodwork, that kind of phrase, where once we really showed through year zero that esports was happening on campus, that there was support for it, that there was the idea that, we talked about that we want it to last. People understood that there are folks here that are doing esports with care, as in they actually do have a basic understanding of what esports means and that they want esports to exist at Humber over long term. And so to them, it was an eye-opening moment of, oh my God, I can do esports for whatever number of years I'm going to be here at college at Humber in a very kind of formal, open environment. It's not like I have to hide in a computer lab to play my video games, right? I don't have to uh, go to a cafe outside, internet cafe at some private business to be able to play video games, to play in esports, right? I have a space, I have an opportunity to do that right here where I'm already spending most of my day going to my classes in between my classes. Because students can have classes from morning all the way till night. There may be a large gassing team where they would like to do other stuff, like other do activities. Now esports becomes an option for them. And so within really the latter half of year zero, all the way into the first part of year one, is you came on towards the end of year one. Sorry, the latter half. Sorry, the end of the first half of year one. I believe it was November, December. So
Yeah.
for a school year, that's the end of a first semester. But within that time frame was a lot of different individuals coming out and showing support of, hey, this is my video game that's being played, right? That I play, and it's not something Humber Esports currently has. Can I be a leader to help develop a community under Humber Esports for this game? Or can I build a team around this video game for Humber Esports? So we started reaching out more, started talking to more folks in the community, even some folks that were in existing communities, such as League of Legends, where they felt that League of Legends is well developed, but they would like to see some other games that they're interested in, right? It's like, oh,
Hmm.
I also play R6, for example, and I see League of Legends well developed. I'm interested in seeing, this other game I care about to also have something similar to League of Legends. And so it becomes talks of how do we expand into these other games. More and more people, as I said, coming out the woodworks and just reaching out of their own accord. And us giving them that opportunity to space. One of the clear spaces was, as I said, the physical infrastructure being the dojo, where someone
Hmm.
could come and knock on the door and say, "Is there someone here I can talk to about making other games happen at Humber Esports?" Right, that they have a physical place they know they can come to congregate at, or to be able to reach us and be able to step forward, be leaders, and develop those other games. And really, that's what it came down to. That for these other games to grow, it has to be called out that there were a lot of students over the years that stepped forward of their own accord as leaders to see this stuff happen. Because for us, Humber Esports, we don't develop these communities on our own necessarily. We
Hmm.
obviously support the growth of more games into our space, but when it comes to the main component of formalizing esports teams, we as Humber Esports don't do that. What we do is we support individual students that are interested in being leaders, motivate them and to build them up to a position where they can be true leaders for it, and for them to take on the effort of I'm willing to put in the work to build a team and lead a team, take them forward and be an esports team to actually compete. It's up to students to step forward and do that. And we've been lucky, as you said, through all those game titles, that there are students from all these different game communities that have chosen to step forward and do that.
So so when we talk about people stepping forward and just outreach and growth, I recall when I was having my interviews last year with the Rainbow Six team as well as Shelter from Counter Strike. There were these references to a game fair that we had. Would you be able to tell us about how that game fair kind of came about, or like who we had representing us there?
Yeah, so the game fair was definitely one of our biggest projects within Humber itself, was that it acted as a club fair. One might think of club fair being lots of different, or all the available clubs within a school environment to come out, have their own little booths, and show off what they do. We did that for Humber Esports, where we set up booths within one single space, being the e-concourse at North campus of the college, where each booth was given to a specific game team in their community to come and showcase their game and their team, what they do, to be able to speak to community that would be interested in possibly joining a team or community of fellow gamers of that specific game, and have a chance to see what it would look like to be part of esports, to be doing esports, especially at a collegiate level. So the game fair was a project mainly developed over a summer and then put together by us alongside the definitely support from some of the staff from our department that we're at that helped us book out the space. And then the booths were set up with the leaders from each of the teams as the main folks manning the station, with the support of some of their players on rotation. Again, the
I
main
see.
people at each booth that would really plan out what I want at my booth and what the booth each booth would showcase was up to the leaders for these teams, who were the coaches and assistant coaches or any other supporting staff for each of these games, as each of our esports teams has to have at least a coach and assistant coach. And it was really up to them to make those decisions, where we as support staff would figure out the overall layout and details and then support each individual team for their own table of what they wanted. We also did have a core section of the fair in the middle, where we had on rotation over the few days of the fair showing off each of the individual games in a small tournament environment, where it allowed the community to verse each other and sometimes verse some of our players who would fill in on a few spots, give them an experience of what it means to supposedly play against a high skilled player that is from a proper competitive team, and get that experience right off the bat through the fair. And then, as well, a big component is, of course, for them to ask questions to our staff as well as our players that I said were on rotation throughout the days of the fairs to really know what it feels like to be a part of a team, see if it matches their own interest, see if it gives them what they might be looking for from an esports team, and hopefully find a hero at Humber Esports and be interested enough to sign up and join tryouts.
So when we talk about these events, I recall when I joined, the big one was Red Bull Adrenaline at the Enercare Center in Toronto, and of course you were there. You went on to the Squad State panel and you spoke. Would you be able to tell me about just that experience of just physically going somewhere and meeting up and discussing collegiate esports with other Ontario-based collegiate esports leaders?
Yeah, so let's be clear, mentioned it's Red Bull Journeyland being that it was Red Bull Blood event.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then us as Humber were there as participants purely for the
Mm-hmm.
event. Um, a number of our teams showed up to play at different tournaments that was part of Adrenaline. This is a kind of separate component to the squad state panel stage. I think is the best way of describing that.
Mm-hmm.
Where I myself was part of for one of their shows that they had throughout the multiple days of the stage existing. For myself, my panel was speaking with a few leaders in the Ontario Collegiate Esports space, being from York University, St. Clair, and Windsor, the University of Windsor, and myself from Humber College. I believe that should be at the four schools, talking about how to kind of set up a club or a group within an Ontario public school, I mean, college or university, and then how to run it, how to operate it, how to improve it, develop it further. And then last was kind of final goals that we would hope to see within the community being Ontario Collegiate Esports. Lots of different ideas and topics that were gone through about how each of our opinions of really how different the space is, how each of our schools operates fairly well, but at the same time operates very differently from one another. We operate at different levels as well, different tiers that exist within the space, um, and then be able to really share that perspective that you don't have to jump into one style or one tier right off the bat. That there are lots of different steps to it. There's lots of different methods, processes, lots of different ways you can be a part of Collegiate Esports Ontario, and that was really for show for that panel of we're able to provide that kind of broad spectrum to folks.
So when we discuss other collegiate organizations within Ontario, there was a couple of times before COVID hit. We had York U's Shadowverse team come out and have some friendly matches against our players, and then we also had that Toronto Ultra event where I believe there was like RIT visited or maybe UFT and then also maybe York. I'm not entirely certain, but would you be able to comment on just what it means for other orgs to be able to communicate and coordinate with one another?
Yeah, so there is one clear component of it is that I mentioned earlier as well is that the space is fairly open to one another. A lot of the leaders in the space are willing to communicate and work with one another. That also translated a bit into the professional esports studies mentioned with Toronto Ultra, for example, where they came out to Humber as part of a what was really collegiate event. And they are not a collegiate team; they are a professional team, but willing to kind of meet the possible next generations of players, pro players.
Mm-hmm.
That there is a very wide level of open communication, mainly over Discord. A lot of different servers exist where there are dedicated spaces to the leaders for different schools, as well as there being a specific Discord server that exists to the leaders for the Canadian esports collegiate scene, where we're able to express opinions, thoughts, and ideas with one another, able to share information, able to communicate with each other for things like these events, where most folks are happy to and they play games with each other. That's what it's all about, to have fun with each other, to look for opportunities for such as these events to be able to meet up in person, interact with each other in real life, and then in a sense also play games with each other in real life, rather than just meeting remotely, such as how we're doing here with over calls, right? That ability for that kind of direct interaction is very open in the community, and folks are often interested in having more opportunities to be able to meet up. For us at Humber specifically, that was a big factor was having a second larger space. As mentioned, those two events, where other schools came to Humber to visit and participate in our events, is that we have a other facility beside our dojo, built in a new building for the college, North Campus, being the CTI, where
Mm-hmm.
we have more machines, more open area, specifically 12 setups, 12 PC setups that allow us to host more individuals into the space at once. These are our same thing, high-end machines as our training space, be able to play games, be able to run events without issues, without much in the way of worries, especially on the technical side. And that is a really great benefit for us at Humber as well as you see for the community to be able to do that physically in person, rather than everyone having to rely on their own resource and their own machines to be able to hope that they can put something together, so to say.
So, especially you talk about the facilities that we have, being able to host other people. Obviously nowadays we're not exactly in a position to have people come visit us, right, because of COVID. And so what I would like to ask you next is about the impact that COVID has had. And I was going to ask about just about Humber Esports, but you can also comment on uh, the state of other collegiate esports schools or departments. Sorry, um, because you would think that since it's COVID, since everything is online now, esports is all online, right? So that must mean that we're not going to be really affected or hit that hard. But I know at least for us, we saw a decrease in the amount of teams that we had and the amount of people that we were able to reach. So would you be able to comment on how COVID has impacted um, our department?
Yeah, for sure. So the biggest kind of two pieces for it, both good and bad, is that with COVID, it has obviously affected everyone's life in major ways. Life is very different, kind of the pre versus post COVID.
Hmm.
Um, Kind of define the era, right? That for us as esports, we are obviously still attached to society, so to say,
Yeah.
right? It still relies on the existence of society. So activities around that were also both in person and digital, that it is based on the ability for society to operate normally. With that, esports has overall, not just collegiate and as a Humber, is faced a both decline and growth in weird ways, where there was decline in a lot of community activities. We talked about earlier just before was that the people do enjoy meeting each other, be able to speak with each other, to meet new people, play with games with each other in person. That
Hmm.
is no longer possible. That causes an immediate hit to people's morale, their mental, their mood, where they may not feel as attached to certain communities or certain games anymore because of the fact that they can't meet with each other in person as they would have fairly normally or regularly before COVID, where we can't host these in-person events where we're meeting with other schools. And so you cause us a bit of a bubble where each school is operating much more independently, much less reliant on others, where it can be good and bad, where they're really let their own ideas flourish, but also they may be getting less help from others because of that idea of less communication, less interaction between one another. And then in kind of wider scheme of esports for decline is that a lot of major esports activities happen as in-person events, where really would fill out traditional sports stadiums or venue halls, concerts,
Yep.
that kind of stuff, and host esports activities there. Thousands of spectators would come out and watch. Collegiate esports was slowly nearing that level.
Hmm.
Some schools in the States, for example, have built their own kind of esports arenas that would seat hundreds of individuals specifically to come out and watch and spectate esports events. In a similar fashion, that some of the major esports tournaments and leagues would kind of cap off their season, their grand finals would happen in person at a major venue. Now these can't happen anymore. So that causes a bit of a decline in viewership and attendance, and also just community morale and care that, oh, we were on this kind of straight path to amazing growth, and suddenly we hit a stop or even decline because we just lost all this kind of viewership that we can't have these major in-person events as part of collegiate esports anymore. That it was exciting that, hey, if my team does really well, if my school does really well, we get to possibly fly out to whatever cool location to watch this final event happen in person, right? Rather than just sitting at home and seeing it from my
Hmm.
screen. That just doesn't, that just can't happen right now. And then the benefit, though, is kind of that same idea of, oh no, I'm stuck at home having to stare at my screen. Well, esports at the end of the day is a piece of entertainment, similar to sports, similar to movies, shows, whatnot. It is very much so based around as a spectator activity, something for people to watch as entertainment in free time or whatnot. And so with COVID, as people were stuck indoors and whatnot, people wanted to seek out more entertainment, more forms of entertainment that were new, unique, something they haven't encountered before. And esports was a very good niche that filled in that. I said before, esports simply isn't that big yet. A lot
Hmm.
of people don't know it much or had much care for it because of the fact that they wanted to see something new, but was also fairly easy to access while established. Esports fit that perfectly. Esports was also commonly used as a substitute for traditional sports because of the fact traditional
Hmm.
sports obviously being played in person, gotta have contact with each other and whatnot. That just couldn't happen with COVID. People look for other kind of similar competitive activities to watch or even be a part of. Esports was a good niche that fit that. As a lot of esports games as well are also traditional sports games. Common ones that people would know would be something like NHL, FIFA, or Madden NFL, right? Those are common sports as video game titles. And those were used to run traditional sports activities instead of actually having players play on a real field. They play on a digital field, so to say. People
Hmm.
keep these kind of activities going. So more and more people transitioned over into esports. And so you saw this kind of weird both decline and growth at the same time within the esports community as people jumped on board to this new interesting piece of entertainment that was kind of out of this world, that was wild, that was so weird. Wanted to know more about it. And so we saw this explosive growth in audience and people's interest in kind of spending as well. Um, And then for us in Humber Esports, what that caused an effect of was a bit of a decline in growth in different titles, where we saw more people show interest from traditional sports communities saying, I want to play these video games around sports titles because I can't play this sport title. I can't play this sport in real life. Or, I'm a competitive person. I want to be competing and stuff, but I can't compete in traditional sports. So I'm going to sign up for this esports teams for this video game I cared about. Maybe just a bit on the side, but now I'm going to put more time into it because I can instead of
Hmm.
traditional sports. Um, where we may have lost some communities due to factors I talked about earlier, but we also had new teams pop up to kind of fill their space, where again these folks that were less interested in esports, that were less caring about their video games as an esport, you suddenly come up and say, I want to turn this thing to an esport. I want to turn my care about this video game into kind of an esport profession. And so we saw that kind of a bit of a growth there.
Yeah. So when we discuss, so actually, I'm going to ask a bit more about just you specifically now. So for this next question, I'm going to open up with like an anecdotal example on my end. So for me, when I came into Humber Esports, I really was only that familiar with League of Legends and Counter Strike. I knew League of Legends as like the more complicated MOBA, and Counter Strike was the more kind of more spectator friendly, newbie friendly thing. But then when I saw Call of Duty, I had always thought that Call of Duty was just kind of run around and shoot things. But then I watch our teams play and I realize there actually is still a lot of strategy to it. It's just more reactive. Or you look at you try to watch a Smash tournament for about 30 to 60 minutes, and you end up kind of mentally tired because they're just moving so fast, right? So at least on your end, with all the esports titles that we've supported at Humber, which one would you say has surprised you the most? And you can interpret that in any way you want.
Sure. The main one is definitely Rocket League. That has been our most title during the COVID, it's called era, really, at this point,
It's hard.
where the game itself had actually popped up in our community of Humber Esports within the COVID era. That it wasn't a title we had pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of that, let's talk about that interest there, kind of the right folks people coming into Humber at the right time, as well as more people caring to put more time into the game during the time while they were at home. And so it popped up as a title for us and eventually developed into a full-on esports team, or two teams to be specific, within our community under our banner of Humber Esports. And it's been really exciting to see them kind of rapidly grow, where other teams
Mm-hmm.
have either stagnated, admittedly, or even declined within our space, that this team has been able to continue to propel itself forward within, or even with the restraints that they've had with various issues relating to COVID. And then the team itself being a game that is car soccer. This is one of good rocket powered car
Yeah.
soccer is a good way of describing it. It was able to bit of a capture that interest as well from people that cared about traditional sports, where they see this video game that looks more or less close enough to some traditional sports that they know, and mainly being soccer,
Mm-hmm.
that they're interested in watching it. If they were soccer fans, where most soccer activities had just stopped, or admittedly, even for one of our players who was a soccer player for the Humber soccer team, had not been able to play soccer anymore and looked for other alternatives to continue playing soccer, more or less. And they end up picking up Rocket League and were pretty good at it, enough to end up joining one of our teams. And so that was kind of the
Jeez.
outlet, that kind of alternative for them, as I talked about. So that was very surprising there. Another thing is that the to see for myself is how developed the collegiate Rocket League community is, as well as in terms of
Yeah.
direct support from the developers of the game,
There are a
which
lot of
is
teams.
not, which is just not very common right now, or especially at the point when they first joined us, to see within the community space that of all the titles, the communities, sorry, the collegiate Rocket League community is really, really willing to support kind of itself, as well as very good at attracting support from the pro scene, which isn't very much a common thing for other esports titles. For instance, developers themselves will uh, promote and directly broadcast and stream the collegiate tournament. They run their own league directly onto their main Rocket League esports channel on Twitch. There are other games that do that. For example, League of Legends, they do the same for their collegiate League of Legends league on their main Riot stream. but it's not as well marketed, nor is it able to pull in as many viewers as the Collegiate Rocket League one is. Another part is that the Collegiate Rocket League is able to pull in more professional talent on the production and broadcasting, and then as well as the casting side to kind of do the collegiate esports work. There are some folks in the other teams that kind of don't care about amateur scene so much, not care about their collegiate side as much. But in the Rocket League community specifically, is that there is within that kind of support from top downwards, be more interested in helping their own community out further. So a lot more kind of friendliness and camaraderie within it. And then that also means that more exposed growth, as you mentioned, lots of teams, where as a game title is capturing almost kind of every school we think of within North America, or specifically USA and Canada. That as a esports title, it is one of the kind of first games that most schools were willing to adopt as an esports team or esports title. Partly is definitely is because of the fact that it is rocket powered car soccer. The concept in itself is easy enough to understand for folks that is true close to traditional sports. So within the era of COVID, of you can't play traditional sports anymore, so let's go play some fancy sports in a digital environment, which is Rocket League, Rocket Powered Car Soccer, and that was attractive to lots of different schools to be willing to support it and adopt it. A non-violent, very friendly, very understanding game of kick a ball as a car into a net. And so that also allowed more viewers to jump on board that may have not traditionally watched video games or even watched any kind of esports stuff. They, if they were to watch esports, they would look for traditional sports titles. But Rocket League is kind of that transition between a traditional sports title and some kind of very fantasy, unique video game environment. Um, and it allowed that bridge over, and so lots and lots of schools were able to just quickly adopt it and run a team for Rocket League, if even if they didn't run any other games.
That's completely mind blowing. That I didn't know like half the things that you just mentioned. Um, so if we backtrack a little bit, if we look at the growth of Humber Esports, or the growth and then maybe a little bit of the downsizing because of COVID, if you had to change one thing, just one thing, what would you change?
Definite change for us during the downsizing process is I would um, just like to have better measures that were in place for us in, I want to say, retaining talent, where we had definitely run into a bit of an issue within the community itself where we weren't able to, maybe not exactly retain talent, but um, how to capture existing talent, where we weren't established enough in a digital environment within Humber that we weren't able to maintain contact with folks once everything went remote.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our activities were very much in person, as you talked about the game fair or club, yeah, the game
Yeah.
fair we had, which was our club fair. That was one of the most effective marketing tools for us to really capture a large amount of audience and talent within the school, and bring them into our esports space to get them to register for our tryouts.
Mm-hmm.
So a big difficulty then with COVID was that we couldn't have a game fair. We couldn't have kind of large in-person events. Um, in our dojo or in our second facility at the CTI, and just couldn't get much people looking at Humber Esports. And so when it came to tryouts period, we ran into a clear issue of we just didn't have enough people to do either A, good tryouts, as effective tryouts we would have liked, or C, of having enough people to run the tryouts in the first place at all. Just not enough folks that
Mm-hmm.
we couldn't even fill out a full team. So some of our teams had to just hold off on a semester or even longer period of not being able to have enough players to compete. The individuals that we did have were still competing on their own. They just couldn't do it anymore under Humber Esports banners. They had to look for teams outside of the college to be able to
Mm-hmm.
continue to pursue their interest of competing. Um, so definite changes that if we could have taken more effort on a kind of almost marketing side, really, of transitioning
Mm-hmm.
or expanding our digital footprint, our reach within a digital space, within the digital environment, so that when it came to that transition from in person to remote, we were able to continue to have the same abilities to kind of capture and retain as much attention and talent within the community, for our teams to be able to have better trials, to be able to have better, more consistent team operations, kind of semester over semester. That was definitely a factor that we have lacked before and are still dealing with to this day. Again, so the big component is just really that transition from in person to remote when it comes to just capturing a community.
So what advice would you give to young students on the outside of collegiate esports looking in that would be interested in getting involved? What are some of the things that they should expect?
A key piece is definitely that when first getting into esports at a collegiate level, it is, I mean, even at pro level as well, it's often not as nice as you may seem on the outside. It's a bit of that kind of joke of rule. I mean, it exists for almost everything, really, of
Hmm.
what's it? Sausage principle, hot dog principle of you may not like finding out how something is made,
Yeah.
right? Or how something really operates on the inside. I mean, that's really the whole point of a lot of the idea of like PR or marketing, right? To make something look fancy on the outside, even if the inside is having struggles on working, or it may not work as nice um, as they want to openly admit. So that is the case in esports, in collegiate esports as well. Common things you might encounter is the idea that there isn't that many paid positions, or that the work requires a lot more effort and time than you might probably think or be willing to initially spend on, right?
Hmm.
That the kind of direct benefits aren't as immediate. Some people say, "Oh, I'm gonna join this team. We're gonna win a tournament in like, I don't know, a month, and we'll win $10,000 out of it." Yes, but also probably not. Even if you join a super big team, I mean, the one thing is, hey, a league is probably actually 3 months of your time. Maybe you only wanted to make that money in 1 month. Too bad, you got to play through 3 months or 4 months before you get to the first stage. Then you actually qualified for the real tournament, which is another 4 months later, and then that's where you win your $10,000.
And
So now you spent 8 months of your life when you're looking to spend 1 month of your life in it, right? So how
it,
much time and effort are you willing to dedicate to this process? Because really, with esports, is much more of a long process, kind of a long haul, where you're not going to get as much immediate gratification, so to say, out of it than a lot of people may come in expecting. It's like, oh, this is a fast-paced environment. This is like very quick stuff. This is video games. It's all about short match, and then we're off, and we get some great, wonderful things happening to us in life. Yes and no, right?
yeah.
It's a lot of it will end up being a lot of small benefits or improvements, bonuses, whatever sort successes, achievements you might expect. But you're not gonna get that kind of grand piece, that big moment early on or immediately unless you were some super genius or something like that. You're the next Albert Einstein, your next faker, and you pull off that immediate success in like a month or something, you know? It's like that is a rare thing. That is an extremely minute thing,
Yeah.
right? You cannot come in expecting that that is going to be you, especially if you're not willing to put enough time and effort to doing so. A common one is I mentioned Faker, who is often recognized as like the world's greatest like esports star, right? Who's made a lot of money, who's found a lot of success, who's living life well while playing video games, being part of esports. He's in it now for something like a decade, right? Before
Yeah.
he found his moment of success, he was already invested in the game he was playing for something like 3, 4 years, and other games as well, not just one single game. So, that idea of like, hey, there was a moment, his first major moment of success, even though no one knew about him until that moment of his success. So people thought like, oh, he must have been doing this for a very short time frame. No, there was a longer story of some 4 or 5 years of his work to get there, right? Often was like,
Hmm.
oh, he only played for 1 year, right? We knew of him playing for 1 year, so to say, before he found his success. So, oh, that short time frame, just 1 year, and I can pop off, I can get this major success. Yes and no. 1 year at that level is true. But there were lots of years at other levels that you didn't know about before you finally got there, that he had to struggle through, that everyone has to struggle to, so to say, to finally get there. Right? So that's the big piece.
But I love yeah, always there's always going to be the expectations versus reality of whatever you go into.
Yeah.
I just love the visual of the example you were giving of like, no, you're not just gonna go in for 1 month and win a tournament. You're gonna play for 3 months just to qualify, and then you're also probably not, you're not even gonna win. It turns out there's like a ton of people who are like way more talented than you, and they're gonna completely crush all of your dreams. But but when we talk about competing, Humber Esports definitely has a couple of very, very proud moments in their history. Namely, our Call of Duty team obviously winning the CCL Season 1 as well as the TESPA Invitational, but also the consistently high placings of Doc Dodo for our Shadowverse team. And from what I
Mm.
understand, apparently he's didn't so like they all graduated and then or most of them graduated, but then they still retained as a team and they're still competing and still doing very well. So, but just would you be able to just how proud are you? How proud are you of just the successes that Humber Esports has seen?
Very proud that we started off at a very kind of minor level, of course. And our expectation for many years was that we would be development focused, and we still are development focused. But what that meant was that we just wouldn't see as much success, kind of at high levels of play for our teams. That we were kind of starting from a bottom point, and for many years, maybe 5, 10 years, that we would aim for kind of just a middle level, right? Middle tier.
Mm-hmm.
If there's 100 teams, then we get 50 or top 50. That'd be great for us. That was it, right? We're not aiming for top 10 or top five. That is,
Mm-hmm.
a hope and a wish, and we'll all be excited about it when it happens. But that wasn't the immediate goal, so to say. That wasn't a priority goal.
Mm-hmm.
It would be through the process that we would hopefully get there. So, in terms of like just being super excited and proud that we kind of broken past that with a lot of our teams, that the work that we've done, the kind of support we're able to provide them has helped them to push beyond that in a faster time frame, in a shorter time frame than we've expected. Right, as you mentioned, the Call of Duty team finding achievements in their first year, really right off the bat. They were the
Mm-hmm.
season one champions. For example, for the CCL, I believe that might have been actually I think it was even like the first year, like 1.5 years into them being a team together, they immediately pulled off that success. It was absolutely insane. And then another one is Dr. Do, which is an example of years and years of working with our team and kind of slowly developing. Um, we just slowly we could see that he had improvements in the main league, which runs a full year from January to November for Shadowverse.
Mm-hmm.
And over the years, each year we would see him end off the season at a kind of better and better position, until the point that this year he ended up, well, graduating from us, and he continued playing on afterwards for more months, qualifying for the World Cup. And has played it, and he's gotten in a pretty good kind of middle position in the Grand Cup to be able to walk home with thousands of dollars. I think something like about 9,000 CAD, Canadian dollars. So
But
he still, thinks about that. Oh, the time I had with Humber was great. That the support I got from them was really great, right? And to remember us as part of that, along with a number of other teams and players as well, that they could definitely say that their time with us was helpful, was beneficial, that we helped them better themselves as a person, better themselves as a player, improve in all aspects of life, so to say, right? So that is like the main focus of pride for us. That we are able to kind of the moment when we let someone off, so to say, when they leave us to graduate, leave the nest,
yeah.
that they can turn around and they tell us and that my time with you guys was good for me, right? There's maybe ups and downs, but overall, it was a positive experience with Humber Esports that you guys definitely helped me in my life in some manner, right? That is what we care about the most. That they learned something, that they found out we could help them, and then they were happy with their time with us.
So when you discuss the revolving door, people always coming and going. What would you say are your hopes for Humber Esports in the long run? Like even 5, maybe even 10 years from now.
Yeah, so that is actually something I'm working on. It's like my final piece as I'm leaving Humber myself soon. And since then I'm graduating from my program, it's in my last year. Is work. I'm actually working on those long-term plans. It's a more clear format. We've always talked about it in the various or between us staff of what that could look like over different time frames, 5 years, 10 years, 100 years down the road, in different intervals in between.
Mm-hmm.
Um, those kind of smaller 5 time frame years for us is being able to have a core consistent staff to help operate Humber Esports. We did have over the years directors, though admittedly they were actually often here for a year or two, leading
Mm-hmm.
us. That we want to have a more solid frame of leadership to guide through these longer years, um, as well as a more clear-cut system of support from the college of them picking up these student leaders that I talked about earlier to be able to better, or yeah, to be able to find these student leaders better, have more open processes, and instead like marketing and wider reach. Because we know these leaders out there, we know these talented individuals are out there, but we're still having that issue of how do we capture them, how do we find them, to bring them forward and take on these leadership positions. And then once they're in a leadership position, provide them with enough support, resources, education materials, and whatnot, to be able to elevate their further, to help them improve themselves, right? So to set up as well and all that is more clear infrastructure. While obviously that isn't as much of a factor now with COVID as things aren't in person, though hopefully that's will come to an end sooner rather than later, and we get back to in person, is that we do have more stable infrastructure in place. There is more physical resources that our teams, all of our teams, no matter what game they're playing, so no matter what kind of console they need, what kind of specs they need, that we are able to support anyone that wants to run an esports uh, team with us. We admittedly do still have issues with that, where we may not have enough equipment for a certain team, or we may not have the right consoles for certain games as new games come out. To be able to say that, yeah, year over year, we can make sure we upgrade our equipment as needed, our infrastructure as needed, to be able to say, we can support you guys to be able to play your games here at Humber, like on our behalf, in a sense, that they don't have to bring in their own equipment. If they, some people would always choose to bring their own equipment, but that idea that we can say like you really don't have to bring your equipment, that we will have what you need here at Humber, right?
Mhm.
And to be able to maintain to say that year over year, but it's just not something we have right now. And for all of that that I've covered, the core piece that we're kind of just cover all of that in itself is budget. As it stands, Humber right now does not support a budget, a separate budget for esports activities. Our revenue is very much so, or our spending or any finances is directly attached to the existing budget for a department that we're under, which is FMCA. We do not have a separate piece that we're able to knowingly work with. We hope that in 5, 10 years, that we get to a point where we are more stabilized, especially within the college administration itself, that they're willing to provide us a direct budget to work from, to work out of, which would then cover all those other activities that I typically before, that we know how we can schedule and plan for each of those pieces, because they give us a clear-cut amount that's saying this is how much you're allowed to work with. Even if it's not as large as we'd like to hope, obviously we have ideas of how much different tiers of budgets that we'd like to have, but just as a first step is just that we do have a budget, um, and consistently that every year we know that we get to a point with the college we're saying, an agreement with the college that they will provide us a budget every year. We may be able to find other personal revenue streams in a sense that Humber Esports is able to work with different partners and sponsors. That's another hope for that's more 10 years to have kind of stable sponsors and partners to be able to give us support us in our revenue. So, yeah, support cover the revenue cover expenses, and that would be part of the budget as well. To just have stable finances year over year.
I love the answer you gave there because obviously for everyone working in esports, everyone that's passionate about it, obviously they would all say something along the lines of like, you know, we would want Humber Esports to live forever. We want Humber Esports to be there as long as Humber's there. We want esports on a collegiate level to be as big of a staple as athletics maybe at some point. But you just gave like the best, in depth on what that would look like. So to conclude this interview, we've been going for a pretty long time. Are there any other points that you would like to talk about or any shout outs that you would like to give?
Yeah, for Humber Esports specifically, a bit of the story for us as well is that the way we formed is different than most, and I'm very proud of that. That right from the get-go, we were able to get faculty support because of the fact that at Humber Esports in the year zero or even the negative ones, twos, and whatnot, there were multiple years of planning and prep work that happened beforehand on the work of two individuals by the name of Dr. Christopher Alexander and Jeffrey LaChapelle, who worked to persuade the college administration to accept that A, esports is a thing that exists, and then B, esports is pretty big sized. Um, though of course that it's still not as big as things like traditional sports, it is growing. And then C, that the college would like to be and wants to be a part of that growth.
Mhm.
They were able to successfully do that. That's how we're at the point we are now, that the school has admitted to esports being legitimate, has allowed esports to exist officially at the college, not just students running it themselves as a small club. There is a certain level of faculty support. So those two individuals were also there as leadership for the first few years of Humber Esports to help us establish infrastructure, to set up our processes, to really help us work within the college was with their deep understanding of administration, and to be able to navigate that and be able to sustain and exist ourselves within the space for as long as we have. And then, of course, as well as our recent director our most recent director, who his name is Jackie Manor. And then she came on board after those two individuals did leave us, um, to fill in their role, was brought in by them to help lead us with her wealth of knowledge within the esports space, having worked decade plus um, professionally in esports. She could bring that wealth of knowledge to us to be able to teach myself and all of our other teams and staff how to do esports professionally, so to say, how to do esports at a high level, get a good connection with the industry too, but she was able to bring in all sorts of guests and contacts that she knew about to come in and speak to us directly. Things like our town halls, and work with us, teach us that this is what you can be doing, right? This is how you can improve yourself to do more things at a high level of esports. And even from there was helping us get connected to possible jobs in the industry. Something she was always happy about was if we asked her like, "Hey, could you use as a reference for our job?" She'd go a step beyond and says, "I know this person at that company. Let me just contact them for you." Right?
Mhm.
Always was a great thing to with her. And then this like last part talk about as a story is just how we came to be. No matter how nice we look now, what we're talking about is that there was something like 5 years of conversation before that year zero of
Mhm.
us existing. I want to talk about like how much time and effort is needed. Like that needs to be, recognized as well. Let's
Yeah.
talk about it's not just, hey, we want esports school, let's just make it happen.
Yeah.
Sure. But what exactly does that entail? And in our case, yeah, 4 or 5 years of work needed that, the public never sees. Right? It's
Yeah.
all under like NDA, so to say. I believe it still is actually not just so to say, but like a lot of it is on the wrap secret meetings, whatnot. Just the discussion with different administration, different levels of administration to college before we get to a point where someone says, yeah, this looks nice, let's make it happen. Right?
I'm on like
Then
my
from there, we are, what, 4 years in?
yeah. I'm like on my
uh,
third year here, and this is the first I've ever heard of this.
yeah. And then I'm third year of my program, and I was in the program. So yeah, 4 years I've been doing this now to get to where I'm at, and to get to the point where Humber Esports is at. That we still say there's a lot more to do. There's a lot more to improve and develop. Um, you mentioned like there's issues that came up through COVID that has caused us to decline and backstep that we'd like to still work through. Right? There is just nonstop amount of effort that is needed to sort of say to make this thing being Humber Esports work.
Mhm.
Right? To make it actually function. Um, just a lot of hard work and effort from a lot of different levels of staff and players, teams, whatnot, to keep this all going. Um, I hope it goes well.
Absolutely. So, Kevin, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you as well. Was super happy to share all of this. I'm excited to hear too that some of the stuff you didn't know about that I talked about
Yeah,
today.
it's going to be probably one of our most valuable time capsules here at Humber Esports.